Clear out your station. You're done." Corrine Maddox set her tasting spoon on the counter. Not dropped it, set it, the way she set everything down after 8 years in this kitchen, with intention and without waste. "May I ask why, Mr. Kessler?" Roland Kessler stood at the center of Saltfield Kitchen's flagship prep floor in a suit that had never once been close to a grease splatter. He was 43, lean, with the particular confidence of a man who had spent his entire career managing things he did not understand. He looked at Corrine the way a tourist looks at a street sign in a language they don't speak, briefly and with no interest in learning. "Because I'm bringing in someone who actually trained for this." His voice was loud enough for the entire kitchen to hear. Every line cook, every prep hand, every person who had spent years working beside Corrine Maddox went still. "You've been running this operation on instinct and sentiment for 8 years and calling it a system. I'm correcting that." Corrine looked at him for a long, level moment. Then she untied her apron, folded it over the edge of the prep table, and picked up her knife roll from the shelf below the counter. She walked out of Saltfield Kitchen on a Thursday afternoon in March. The door swung shut behind her. Nobody in that kitchen said a word. But in 21 days, every single person in that building would understand something Roland Kessler did not. The woman he had just dismissed was the only reason any of it worked at all. Have you ever watched someone walk back into a room they were told to leave and make everyone in that room go completely quiet? Drop a comment and let me know, because what Corrine Maddox walked back into will take your breath away. Subscribe to Velvet Reckoning and stay with me from the beginning. This story starts long before that Thursday afternoon. Corrine pulled out of the Saltfield Kitchen parking lot in a 10-year-old Subaru with a cracked rear bumper and a check engine light she'd been meaning to address since October. She drove 3 blocks before she stopped, put the car in park, and sat with her hands on the wheel and the engine running. Then she called home. "Mom?" Layla answered on the second ring. 12 years old, sharp and quick. "You never call during service." "Service is done for me today, baby." A pause. "What happened?" "I'll tell you at dinner. Do we have sweet potatoes?" 1. "That's enough." She hung up before her voice did what she didn't want Layla to hear. The drive home took 18 minutes. Corrine spent every one of them going over the numbers she already had memorized. The rent on their apartment in East Nashville had increased twice in 3 years. Layla's violin lessons were $120 a month. Corrine had promised those would not stop, no matter what. Her mother in Memphis needed help with the water bill every other month without fail. Her savings account held enough for 8 weeks. Maybe 6 if the car needed anything beyond what she could fix herself. 6 weeks. That was the length of rope between Corrine Maddox and the floor. She drove past a Saltfield Kitchen on the way home. There were 3 within a 6-mile radius. That was the thing about her work. It was everywhere. And in 21 days, everywhere was going to start coming apart. To understand what Roland Kessler had just done, you need to understand what Saltfield Kitchen actually was. Calvin Brewer had founded it 35 years ago with a steam table, 11 recipes, and a rented space in a Chattanooga strip mall. Southern comfort food, slow-cooked, real ingredient, the kind of cooking that took time and didn't apologize for it. By the time Corrine Maddox walked through the back door as a prep cook at 29 years old, Saltfield had grown to 9 locations and a regional reputation for being the most reliable thing on a long stretch of highway between Nashville and Atlanta. It had also nearly gone under, twice. The second time, 12 years ago, Calvin had called every manager into the same room and told them the truth. Numbers were catastrophic. The chain was losing consistency between locations. Customers in Knoxville were getting a different meal than customers in Birmingham. Word was spreading. He had 6 months before the banks called the notes. Corrine Maddox had been at Saltfield for 4 years at that point. She asked Calvin if she could have access to every kitchen's production logs for the past 2 years. He handed them over without a question. She spent 3 weeks reading. She read the way her grandmother had taught her to read a pot. Not for what was written, but for what the numbers were trying to say underneath. Then she came back to Calvin's office with 47 pages of handwritten notes and a proposals she called the The method was not a recipe book. It was a complete operating system for a multi-location kitchen. Sauce compositions mapped down to the gram with seasonal adjustment guides for ingredient variation by region and quarter. Timing charts calibrated to each individual oven's actual heat output, not the dial setting, because Corrine knew those two numbers were almost never the same. A quality checkpoint sequence she called the round, where every station self-audited against master standards 3 times per service. A cross-training rotation that ensured every cook could cover every station within their first 6 months. A mentorship structure that paired veteran cooks with new hires and treated that knowledge transfer as formal, documented work rather than informal favor. And at the center of all of it, a master reference Corrine called the Black Book. A single handwritten volume, updated every quarter, containing everything a Saltfield kitchen needed to be Saltfield. The real recipe, the heat curves, the calibration records, the seasonal notes, the quality benchmarks, every detail that lived in the hands and instincts of the people she'd trained, written down for the first time in one place. She built it over 18 months of unpaid overtime, testing every protocol, revising every chart, training every key cook personally across all 9 locations. When the method went live across the chain, the consistency problems vanished inside 90 days. Food costs dropped 11%, customer return rates climbed. By the following fiscal year, Saltfield Kitchen was not just solvent, it was growing. Calvin Brewer had done something then that surprised even him. He called Corrine into his office and slid a document across the desk. "I can't give you a title that matches what you've done," he said. His voice was even, but his eyes weren't. "The board won't approve it for someone without a culinary degree. That's not right, but that's what it is. What I can give you is this." The document was an operating agreement. Calvin was transferring 18% ownership in Saltfield Kitchen LLC to Corrine Maddox, held through a subsidiary entity called the Maddox Family Trust. No press release, no announcement, no ceremony. A share of the company she had saved. "The time isn't right to make this public," Calvin said, "but you built the thing that kept this company alive. That deserves to mean something permanent." Corrine signed it. Then she went back to the kitchen and started the next quarterly update to the Black Book. Nobody told Roland Kessler. Not because anyone was hiding it, because Roland had never once asked the right questions about anything except the quarterly P&L. He arrived from Meridian Group, a hospitality conglomerate that had acquired a minority stake in Saltfield 8 months ago. In 9 years he had reorganized 4 restaurant chains. He was efficient, certain, and entirely convinced that a Southern comfort chain running on what he called tribal knowledge and sentiment was a liability waiting to be corrected. Within his first 6 weeks, Roland terminated 9 employees. 7 of those 9 were black. The 8th was a Latina woman named Rosa, who had run Saltfield's catering division with perfect reliability for 11 years. The 9th was the only white kitchen manager who had formally objected to the pattern in writing. Roland had a word for all of them, redundant. Another word he favored was legacy, spoken with the specific distaste of someone who had confused longevity with obsolescence. He spoke about the existing workforce the way a man speaks about old furniture, something to be cleared out before the renovation could begin. His replacement for Corrine was Tyler Osman, 26, trained at a culinary institute in Chicago, certified in modern flavor profiling and commercial kitchen operations. Tyler had worked at 3 restaurants in 4 years. He was charming, composed, and spoke about food the way people who have read extensively about cooking, but rarely produced it under pressure, tend to speak. In concepts, in influences, in the vocabulary of someone who had learned to talk about food rather than to make it in real time, under real conditions, for real people who drove past 3 other restaurants to get to yours. Corrine heard about the other terminations through the people who still called her. Yvonne, the prep lead with 14 years at Saltfield, let go on a Wednesday with 2 weeks' notice and no explanation beyond restructuring. James, who knew by touch and sound when the fryers were at the right temperature without ever looking at the readout, walked out on a Friday. Sandra, who had personally trained 42 cooks across 7 locations and could identify a broken sauce by smell from across a prep station, was gone the following week. The kitchen felt the loss before the numbers did. Corrine knew it the way you know when a structure has lost a load-bearing wall, not always visible from the outside, but something in the air has changed, and everything after that moment carries the consequence. She learned how to cook before she learned how to read a clock. Her grandmother Ida kept a kitchen in a small house outside Selma, Alabama, that smelled like bay leaf and brown butter the moment you stepped onto the porch. Ida Maddox had worked as a domestic cook for a wealthy household for 31 years. She had never owned a restaurant. She had never written down a single recipe. Everything she knew lived in her hands, her nose, the quiet and unhurried way she could stand at a stove for 2 minutes and tell you, precisely, without a thermometer, exactly what a pot was doing and what it needed. A kitchen isn't about the food, Ida used to tell Corrine, pressing her granddaughter's small hands flat against the worn wooden counter. It's about understanding. You understand what something needs, and you give it exactly that. No more, no less. The food knows when you're guessing, and it will tell everyone at the table. Corrine understood. By 10 years old, she was making biscuits from scratch, calibrating rise and crust by feel rather than timer. By 14, she was scaling her grandmother's gumbo for 4 different family sizes without changing the balance of flavor. By 17, she was cooking the entire church social dinner alone because Ida's hands had begun to shake in the mornings, and someone had to carry it forward. Ida died when Corrine was 22. A stroke, in that kitchen, on a Tuesday. The pot of red beans on the stove behind her was almost finished. Corrine finished them that afternoon, because that was what Ida would have wanted. You don't walk away from something that's almost ready. Corrine could not afford culinary school. Her mother worked long shifts. Her father had not been around since Corrine was 9. Culinary school was $60,000 she did not have, in exchange for credentials that would tell other people what her hands already knew. So she went to work. She worked every station in every kitchen that would have her. She read everything she could find on food science, kitchen operations, industrial cooking systems. She learned the way Ida had taught her, by listening to what the thing in front of her was actually saying, rather than what the instructions said it should be doing. No one had ever given her a title that matched what she did. They never would, until it was almost too late. If this story is already making something rise in your chest, hit that like button and subscribe to Velvet Reckoning, because what comes next is the part Roland Kessler never saw coming. It took exactly 18 days. That was how long it took for the method to begin coming apart without the people who carried it. It started at the Birmingham location. The signature slow-cooked collard greens, a fixture on the menu for 30 years, the dish that regulars drove 40 minutes to eat, began coming out flat. Not wrong in a way that was easy to explain, just absent something. A quality inspector flagged it on day 9 as flavor inconsistency and filed a report to Tyler Osmond's inbox. Tyler increased the smoked pork hock quantity by 15% and updated the instruction sheet for that station. On day 12, 4 other locations reported the same issue. Tyler flew in, tasted, adjusted again. He filmed a training video. He sent new instruction sheets with revised measurements. On day 15, the problem had spread to 9 of the 22 locations, and it had moved past the greens. The house sauce, a slow-reduced cane syrup and tomato base that had been Saltfield's most recognized item for 2 decades, began breaking mid-service at the Memphis location, separating in the pan, losing its body, turning out thin and uneven. By day 16, it was happening in Chattanooga, then Louisville, then 2 locations in Atlanta on the same afternoon. Tyler called his former instructor at the Culinary Institute. He called a food science consultant from Chicago, who flew in and spent 8 hours across 2 kitchens before flying home without an answer. The base formula is technically sound, the consultant told Tyler on her way out, but whatever is happening in execution doesn't match anything the recipe should produce. It's as if the recipe was written for a specific set of conditions that no longer exist, and nobody documented what those conditions were. The conditions were the method, the specific burner calibrations, the heat curves written for the actual equipment rather than the manufacturer's settings, the timing sequences that Corrine had adjusted location by location, oven by oven, in a process that took her 3 years and lived entirely in the black book. and the black book had walked out the door in Corrine Maddox's canvas bag on a Thursday afternoon in March. By day 18, Saltfield's defect rate, dishes returned, remade, or flagged by quality checkers, had climbed to 26%. The internal target was under 3%. Then, the call came in about the governor's dinner. The governor of Tennessee was hosting a 300-person dinner at the state capitol in 11 days, a $4.2 million catering contract that Saltfield's sales team had worked to close for 8 months. The request had been personal. A state senator whose wife had eaten Saltfield's house sauce at every family celebration she could remember had specifically asked for it by name. He wanted Saltfield to taste like Saltfield. He had said those words on record. Roland Kessler had approved the contract himself. He had held a press conference about it. Now the flagship kitchen could not produce the house sauce consistently across a single dinner service. Harriet Wells, Saltfield's director of operations, had watched all of this from her desk, with the tight and careful silence of someone who has done the math and does not like where it lands. Harriet was 51. She had been at Saltfield for 16 years. She had watched Corrine build the method from 47 pages of handwritten notes into the living foundation of a 22-location chain. She had also watched Roland Kessler arrive, take credit for a stability he had not created, and systematically remove the people who had. She had stayed quiet. She had a daughter finishing her junior year at Vanderbilt, and a mortgage, and a clear understanding of what happened to people who asked inconvenient questions in Roland Kessler's orbit. But $4.2 million, and Corrine Maddox was Corrine Maddox. Harriet walked into Calvin Brewer's office on day 18 with a folder under her arm. Calvin still came in on Tuesdays, still held his founding shares, still moved through the building like a man who had built it with his hands, even though the hands had been replaced by lawyers and acquisition documents a long time ago. She laid the folder open on his desk, the defect reports, the sauce failure logs, the consultant's findings, the governor's dinner contract and its timeline. Calvin read all of it without speaking. Then he set the last page down. Who built the method? Corrine Maddox. Where is she? Harriet placed a second document beside the folder. The termination paperwork, 6 weeks old, with Roland Kessler's signature at the bottom. Calvin's face did not move. Something behind it did. He picked up the phone and called August Fenn. August Fenn was 71 years old and had been for the past 4 decades the most respected culinary systems consultant in the country. He had restructured the kitchens at 4 Michelin 3-star restaurants. He had consulted for institutional food programs, major hotel groups, and 3 of the largest restaurant chains in America. His published work on kitchen efficiency was taught at 11 culinary programs. When August Fenn declared a kitchen system extraordinary, it was on record in the industry. When he declared it broken, the cause was settled. Calvin told him what was happening. August was in Nashville in 36 hours. He spent a full day moving through 5 Saltfield kitchens. He tasted every signature item. He walked every station. He read the production logs from the past 6 weeks and compared them against the 6 months prior. He sat across from Tyler Osman for 40 minutes and asked careful, specific questions. Tyler answered all of them with genuine effort and without understanding why the answers didn't add up. When August returned to the Saltfield corporate office, the room was waiting. Roland stood near the window in his best suit. Tyler sat at the conference table with a laptop open. 3 board members occupied chairs along the wall. Harriet Wells sat at the far end of the table with her hands folded. "I've seen a great deal in 40 years, August said, before he had fully taken his seat. "What I have not seen is a multi-location kitchen running at 98% consistency with no central commissary, no standardization equipment beyond what a commercial kitchen normally carries, and voluntary staff turnover under 12% annually." He set his hands flat on the table. "I also have not seen a kitchen of that caliber deteriorate this quickly, which tells me the consistency was never structural. It was personal. It lived in the people, and in whatever system those people were working from." He looked at Roland directly. "Who designed your operating protocols?" Roland glanced at Tyler. "We're in the process of modernizing." "I'm not asking about modernization. I'm asking who built the system that was operating in your kitchens before they started failing. The silence that followed had a texture to it. Harriet spoke. Her name is Corrine Maddox. She designed and built the method over 18 months of initial development, then maintained and updated it for 6 additional years. Her listed title was Senior Culinary Lead. Where is she now? Harriet held Roland's gaze as she answered. Mr. Kessler terminated her employment 6 weeks ago. August Fenn removed his glasses. He cleaned them in the particular unhurried way of a man who is choosing his next words carefully. He put them back on. Then you need to call her, he said, today. Calvin Brewer rose from his chair, 68 years old, and standing in this room was still a statement. Roland. His voice had the quality of something cold and very certain. Explain to me why the woman who saved this company is no longer in this building. Roland's mouth opened. What came out was not an answer. Corrine was making red beans in her kitchen. Ida's recipe, adjusted from memory, the way she made it every week, because some things you don't put down just because the occasion for them has changed, when Harriet Wells called. I need you to let me finish before you say anything, Harriet said. Go ahead. Harriet told her everything, the defect rates, the sauce failures, the governor's dinner, August Fenn. Calvin Brewer standing in his own boardroom asking questions no one in that room could answer. Corrine set the spoon on the rest by the stove. She looked at the pot for a moment, then out the kitchen window where the late afternoon light came in flat and long across the counter. She thought about Ida's hands, about the 12 composition notebooks she had filled over 8 years, logging every calibration, every seasonal adjustment, every system revision, about the envelope she had sent to a patent attorney the week before Roland had called her into his office, because she had watched the pattern of what he was doing and she had understood, before he ever said a word to her directly, that something was coming, and she had always believed in finishing what you started, before someone else had the chance to take it from you. I'll come, Corrine said, but I have conditions. Name them. I walk in through the front entrance. Done. Full access. No one watching over me. No one telling me what I'm doing wrong. Done. Tyler Osman is in the room for the entire demonstration. He sees all of it. I'll make sure of it. And I want Harriet present for every conversation between me and the board. A pause. One more thing. Every person Roland fired gets a personal phone call today. Not tomorrow, today. They deserve the choice to come back, and they deserve to hear it before the news cycle makes it for them. The pause on Harriet's end lasted 3 seconds. Done. All of it. Then I'll be there tomorrow morning. Corrine Maddox arrived at the Saltfield Kitchen flagship on Decatur Street at 7:45 the next morning. She wore clean kitchen whites and the apron she had taken home the night she left. Her knife roll was over one shoulder. Her worn black canvas bag hung from the other. The kitchen was full when she walked in. Line cooks at their stations. Tyler Osman standing near the pass with his hands at his sides, the composure in his face doing less work than usual. Harriet Wells by the walk-in door, 3 board members in the back. August Fenn leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed, watching everything without expression. Calvin Brewer sat in a metal folding chair someone had carried in from the conference room upstairs. Roland Kessler stood in the corner by the dry storage shelving, jacket buttoned, hands in his pockets, jaw carrying the particular set of a man who has begun to understand what he is standing inside of. Corrine did not greet anyone. She walked to the center prep station. She set her bag on the counter. She tied her apron. The house sauce has been separating, she said. Not a question. Not because the formula is wrong. Because the reduction protocol assumes a specific heat curve that only holds under the burner calibration sequence I installed 4 years ago. Someone reset the burners to manufacture a default. The sauce protocol was written for my calibration, not theirs. 2 different languages. The sauce knows the difference. She opened the canvas bag. She removed a spiral-bound notebook, well worn at the edges, the cover reinforced with electrical tape where it had started to give. She opened it to a marked page and set it flat on the prep table. This is the burner calibration chart for this location. Every station, every burner, mapped by actual heat output rather than dial setting. The sauce reduction protocol is on the facing page. Everything cross-references. August Fenn stepped closer. His expression didn't change. Something behind it did. Corrine began to cook. She made the house sauce from scratch, talking through each step not for the board members, but for the line cooks. The people who had been trying to solve this problem for 3 weeks and were watching her with the focused attention of workers who have been doing the same task wrong for long enough that they are hungry, finally, to understand why. 40 minutes later, the sauce was done. August Fenn tasted it. He set the spoon down on the counter and looked at Corrine for a long, quiet moment. "That," he said, "is what it is supposed to taste like." A sound moved through the kitchen. Not applause, something with more weight. The sound of people who have been working in the dark and have just found the light. Corrine opened the notebook to a different section. Turned it toward the room. This is the Black Book. Every Saltfield location has its own corresponding section. Sauce profiles, timing protocols, seasonal adjustment guides, burner calibration records for each piece of equipment I personally mapped, quality checkpoint sequences, training benchmarks, cross-location consistency notes. Everything this chain runs on, one volume, updated every quarter for 8 years. She paused. "One copy here." "Nothing like this exists in any documented internal system," Tyler said. His voice had lost most of its certainty. "Because I carried it." Corrine looked at him directly, without anger. The knowledge lived in this book and in the people who had been trained from it. When you remove those people, you remove the working language of 22 kitchens. The book exists. The people can be called back. The systems can be rebuilt. She reached into the canvas bag again. "But there is something else you need to see." She set a manila folder on the prep table beside the Black Book. 3 weeks before my termination, I filed for patent protection on the 3 proprietary formulas at the core of the method: the house sauce base, the slow reduction compound for the brisket program, the dry rub profile. She opened the folder, patent pending as of 6 weeks ago, all 3 filed under my name. The room went still in a way that was different from the silences before it. Roland Kessler's face moved through several things before it stopped moving altogether. "What that means," Harriet said from the end of the table, her voice level and clear, "is that this company has been using those formulas since the date of termination without authorization from the intellectual property holder." August Fenn turned from Corrine to the board members on the far wall. He had not spoken in several minutes. When he did, his voice covered the entire floor without being raised. "I want to be precise about what I am about to say. In 40 years of consulting across 4 continents and every significant restaurant group in this country, I have not seen a culinary consistency system of this sophistication designed and implemented by a single person across a 22-location chain. Without institutional support, without a documented budget for the work, and without formal recognition of any kind." He let the sentence stand. "You did not terminate a line cook. You terminated the architect of everything that made this company worth acquiring." No one in the room moved. Calvin Brewer stood up from the folding chair. At 68, the act of rising carried the weight of everything he had built over 35 years. He looked at Roland Kessler the way a man looks at something he wishes he had examined more carefully before he trusted it. "Harriet," he said, "the operational reports." Harriet opened the second folder she had carried in under her arm all morning. Corrine filed 31 operational reports over 3 years documenting the method, its updates, and its expansion needs. 12 formal memos, 4 written proposals for system documentation and staffing support. She placed a printed sheet on the prep table. I pulled the response logs from the document management system. Calvin picked up the sheet. He read it. Every report Corrine had filed, every single one, stamped with Roland Kessler's system login and 2 words: not actionable. She told you in writing 31 times that this system existed and that it needed to be documented and supported. Calvin's voice did not rise. It dropped the way the temperature drops before a storm. And you called her a line cook running on instinct. Roland straightened. The reports came from a non-credentialed employee operating outside the scope of her. She owns 18% of this company. Calvin did not raise his voice. He did not need to. 18%, held through the Maddox Family Trust LLC. On record in our operating agreement for 12 years, since the day she handed me 47 pages of handwritten notes and saved us from closing permanently. You didn't know that because you never looked. And you never looked because you had already decided what she was before you walked through the door. The word that followed that sentence was silence. But it was the kind of silence that says everything. August Fenn stepped forward one final time. I will add this for the record. The diagnostic logs in that notebook confirm that every report Ms. Maddox filed corresponds directly to a documented system event or update. Her documentation was meticulous, accurate, and systematically ignored. I believe every person in this room understands why. He looked at Roland Kessler. Roland said nothing. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't make it worse. Now, if you've stayed this long, if you felt what Corrine felt in that kitchen, I need you to do something. Drop a comment below. Tell me, if you were standing in that room, watching the man who called you a line cook finally run out of words, would you stay? Or would you make him live in the full weight of what he threw away? Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs it. And subscribe to Velvet Reckoning, because the ending of this story is something you have earned. The board voted the following week. Roland Kessler was removed as CEO effective immediately, with the formal citation referencing gross mismanagement of operational assets and systematic suppression of documented business-critical material. His severance arrangement, originally structured at $800,000, was voided under the misconduct clause buried in paragraph 7 of his employment contract. His attorney filed a formal objection. Saltfield's legal team responded with the Black Book, the patent filings, the 31 suppressed reports, and a signed declaration from August Fenn. The attorney withdrew the objection within 5 days. Tyler Osmond submitted his resignation the morning after the board meeting. He cleaned his office without conversation and left without a statement. Before he drove out of the parking lot, he found Corrine in the maintenance bay off the prep kitchen, recalibrating the burner array on the east line. He stood in the doorway for a moment. I didn't know about the Black Book, he said. About any of it. Kessler told me you were legacy staff running the kitchen on feel. He said he needed someone to bring it into a real system. Corrine kept working for a moment. Then she set down the calibration tool. And you believed him. I wanted to believe I was the right person for it. Corrine looked at him directly, without cruelty. You're not a bad cook, Tyler. You're just not a humble one yet. You walked in and assumed your credentials told you what this kitchen was doing. Next time someone tries to show you how something actually works, let them finish. Tyler stood there for another breath. Then he nodded once and walked out of Saltfield Kitchen for the last time. Word traveled through the industry the way it always does, quietly at first, then all at once. Roland Kessler's name became the kind of cautionary tale whispered in hiring committees and told at industry dinners. The executive who terminated the architect of a 22-location kitchen system suppressed her documentation for 3 years and nearly destroyed a $4.2 million contract in 11 days, all because he had decided what she was before he understood what she had done. The governor's dinner proceeded on schedule. 300 guests, every dish timed correctly, every sauce right. The senator's wife ate 2 portions of the house sauce and told the catering director, unprompted, that it tasted exactly the way she remembered. Henderson Partners, the investment group that held the Meridian stake, did not just renew their confidence in Saltfield after the restructuring. They expanded it. Calvin Brewer called Corrine into his office the week after the board vote. I should have put your name on the operating documents 12 years ago, he said. I told myself the time wasn't right. The truth is, I was a coward about a fight I didn't want to have with a board that would have told me a woman without a culinary degree couldn't hold that position. He paused. I was wrong, and I am telling you that in the same room where I should have told them that 12 years ago. Corrine accepted the apology the way she accepted most things, steadily and without excess. Her conditions for returning were not negotiable and not complicated. Full reinstatement with the title that matched the work. Executive Culinary Director. the method formally documented as her intellectual property, with a licensing agreement that gave Saltfield full operational use in exchange for royalty terms and permanent attribution. Her name on every document that referenced the operating system she had built, and a personal call made to every employee Roland Kessler had terminated, Rosa, James, Yvonne, Sandra, and the others, offering them the choice to return, with back pay for the weeks they had been out. Not everyone said yes. Some had already found other positions. Some had built something new in the weeks since the door had been held open for them. Some could not walk back through those doors and have it feel like anything other than a thing that had been done to them. Corrine understood all of it. You don't get to break something and then dictate the terms of its healing. The ones who came back found a different kitchen. 6 months later, Calvin Brewer and August Fenn signed a licensing agreement for the method, a framework for multi-location kitchen consistency to be used in Fenn's national consulting curriculum. The agreement was valued at $1.8 million over 3 years. Corrine Maddox was listed as sole creator, with full intellectual property credit on every page. Her name on a document attached to the work she had done. It was a small thing. It was the only thing that had ever really mattered. 6 months after that, Corrine stood on the landing above the Decatur Street prep floor on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Below her, the kitchen moved the way a well-tuned thing moves. Not loud, not urgent, just exactly right. Every burner calibrated correctly, every sauce reducing on the right curve, the round running clean across every station. On her desk upstairs, next to a framed photograph of Layla at her spring violin recital, eyes down, bow moving, absolutely focused, sat a wooden spoon with a crack along the handle that had been repaired 3 times with kitchen twine. Ida's spoon, the only inheritance that had ever had any weight. That afternoon, Layla came in after school. She stood at the center prep station and looked out across the kitchen floor the way Corrine had stood there once, seeing something in the movement and rhythm of it that most people walked past without noticing. "Can you show me how the sauce actually works?" Layla asked. "Not what the instruction sheet says, the real way." Corrine handed her a spoon. "You start by understanding what it needs," she said. "Not what you want it to be, what it actually needs right now in this pot, with these ingredients on this day. You give it exactly that, no more, no less." Layla took the spoon. She looked at the pot on the burner. She went still, the way someone goes still when they are genuinely listening. She was already learning the language. If this story moved you, if you have ever been told you were something less than what you knew yourself to be, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Velvet Reckoning for more stories like this one, and leave me a comment. Have you ever worked somewhere that ran on what you knew, only to watch someone walk in and treat your knowledge like it didn't exist? Tell me what happened. I'll be reading every word.